Why don't we begin? So, I'm Jeff Fortgang. I'm one of the LCL clinicians. I'm here with the other three LCL clinicians, Barbara Bowe, Sean Healy, and Tracy Myers. We want to welcome you to what for us is a different kind of program. Given the time of year, you might ask, why is this presentation different from all other presentations? And for one thing, it includes all four of the LCL clinicians. And we imagine that it's going to be something like the kinds of discussions that we have when we meet as a group, and we always have a variety of perspectives. And I'll just mention now that if over the course of the time we're meeting, you have questions, you can plug those into either the chat or the Q&A. So the subject we're addressing today is the sense of demoralization that has descended on many lawyers and non-lawyers at this uncertain and changing moment in American history. There are, of course, no clear answers or solutions, but we think it's helpful when all of us share our experience and views. Myself, one of the groups I do at LCL is the Immigration Lawyers Group. You can imagine what they're experiencing these days, an acute sense of how the current landscape affects them and affects the meaning and the impact of their work, how difficult it is to try to protect and advocate for their clients in a climate of shifting sands and brutal realities. And that's just one example, but it's one that I'm confronted with. It's been a time of change and challenge for all lawyers, including, and this is not an exhaustive list, those working in the military or on behalf of veterans, representing large firms who decide how to respond to governmental pressures, representing universities, representing cities, towns, and states faced with new and unpredictable pressures, those who have lost or left positions in various federal agencies. For all Americans, regardless of occupation or political inclination, it's been a time of great change as we witness the country and the world moving in unfamiliar directions. Let's briefly talk about some of these overlapping concepts that are in some way related to today's topic. And any person may be experiencing one or more or all of these. The first concept is burnout. I'm going to read this. Burnout is a state of feeling depleted of energy, alienated, or cynical about one's work, and experiencing significantly reduced professional effectiveness. It looks very much like depression, but is directly linked to the individual's experience of their job and workplace. PTSD, and by extension, vicarious traumatization. PTSD is a lasting reaction to an actual or threatened horrific event, with features including mood disturbance, flashbacks, or other kinds of re-experience of the traumatic event, avoidance of situations reminiscent of the event, and exaggerated arousal symptoms such as insomnia or hypervigilance. Vicarious traumatization is a milder version of PTSD in reaction to indirect trauma exposure, such as hearing a client's description of torture or abuse. Another concept that I've become familiar with more recently is that of moral injury. Moral injury is a term capturing the experience of behaving or witnessing the behavior of people or systems that operate in a way that conflicts with one's own moral values. So either that you find yourself behaving in a way that you don't morally approve of, or that you're witnessing or part of a system that does that. So demoralization is a more pervasive and generalized sense of helplessness and reduced hope and meaning, along with feeling disempowered, that nothing one does will make a difference. The challenge is to seek ways to restore a sense of meaning and hope and some concept of a pathway to change. So that being the general conceptual framework and introduction, which I did very concisely, leaving more time for others. I'd like to turn to the other clinicians to ask, what have you been seeing and observing in your LCL clients in recent months and years? And then later on, we'll go around again asking about people's ideas on coping strategies. Let me start with Barb. What have you been observing?
So Jeff, thanks for the handoff. I want to just kind of speak in general terms and provide a little bit of an overview in terms of the clients that I've seen at the LCL. We could talk about it since COVID, but maybe more specifically for the last year. So I see a lot of law students, I see a lot of lawyers in practice, and I see lawyers that get into trouble from an ethical standpoint, maybe at risk of license suspension or disbarment. So I have a range of people that I see. And I think in particular for law students, part of the struggle these days is in terms of what you were saying before about moral injury. Students that feel conflicted by wanting their law schools to take certain stances or have opinions or be more committed in terms of a focus and a value system around what they see happening in the legal profession nationally. I think also issues related to students wanting to try and be perfect in the context of how they manage law school, thinking that that will give them some advantage in terms of potential career options, and the stress and the pressure incumbent upon that sometimes is just too much of an overreach. I think in some respects, part of the dynamics of what's going on within the country, people feel, students, and this is true for lawyers as well, can feel somewhat victimized by circumstances and really questioning the value to what they do, the efficacy of the work that they provide, and just sort of how to manage feeling like there's a lot of an uphill battle in terms of legal practice areas and what the potential for the future looks like in terms of alternate practices or other kinds of employment. And I think there's kind of a certain question and cynicism around the profession in general when lawyers and students have seen firms that have caved or capitulated in terms of demands from Washington and the government, and it has really made them question what area of practice they might want to pursue and why, and in what context, and in what kind of culture of a legal practice they want to become part of. Um, I think it's also been important, and people have spoken about this, but sometimes find it hard to know how to organize around it. The ability to build resilience in terms of combating some of the fatigue, some of the emotional exhaustion that people feel, and some of the wonder around what the future will hold for them. Um, I think that people have become much more circumspect in a way on looking at the kinds of career they want to pursue, areas of practice that make sense to them, or maybe looking for areas of practice that create a certain stability, and a need to really try and marshal as many resources as they can to figure out how they want to proceed, learn some different ways to cope, manage, and deal with what they feel like is somewhat of an uphill battle in terms of where things stand professionally. So I think that people who have had past histories of trauma are particularly easily triggered by the environment we're in now in terms of loss of benefits, loss of medical coverage, uncertainty around the direction things will go, questions about how the DOJ is operating and what is ethical and what is not. And will certain bar associations take a stand on certain behaviors that they see or question as unethical. So I think that there's a lot of moving parts in terms of what people are struggling with these days and trying to figure out what is the best way to proceed, how to take care of myself in the context of real challenging situations, and what will the future hold for what I want to do.
Yeah. So yeah, it's one sense of making plans really, to some extent, is disrupted by the sense that everything is changing and shifting around.
Mm.
Okay, great. Um, how about Tracy? You have some input on what you've been seeing in clients at LCL?
Yeah, I'm thinking about like what Barb was saying about who's coming in and really the whole range from students to people working in public sector, legal aid and other environments like that, all the way to in law firms. And often people come in to see me when they are struggling emotionally. And it's not always clear what is leading to that, but common things I hear from lawyers and students too will be something like, I'm more irritable, I'm getting frustrated more, um, or there's more of a sense of low energy. I don't feel like going to work, or it's hard to do what I'm doing. It's playing out in terms of not, being timely or procrastinating. Um, so people aren't feeling great, and it's not always clear, at first what's actually happening. And what often I see is that it's really this internal reaction to a lot of the external that's happening. And so this combination of, our own reactivity plus what's happening outside of them. And that can produce lots of dysregulation. And for lawyers, they're often, thinking and trying to work it through and problem solve and fix. And yet there's all these emotions going on that are operating sometimes underneath their awareness. And it can be very uncomfortable. And so, you know, when someone comes in and says, yeah, I was short with the judge, or I was irritable with a coworker, or I didn't have patience for my kids at home, I start thinking about what's happening with chronic stress in the nervous system, and seeing a lot of people dysregulated. And it could be dysregulated in terms of more of that anger, fight, mobilization response, or it could be more of a shutdown, which gets to what you were sharing, Jeff, around some of the demoralization, moral injury, some of that, lower energy. I don't feel like I have choice, right? So we can get more into that shutdown, and neither feel particularly good. I know we're going to talk about strategies and how we manage that, but in the second half. But just to comment, like, this doesn't feel good in our nervous systems. So the more that the work is already stressful, and if someone doesn't have full awareness of what's happening inside of them, work can be very difficult. It can be hard to show up. And for law students to feel this early on can be so distressing, because they've gone in with such passion and interest and focus, and suddenly there are all these uncomfortable feelings coming up, questioning, like you were saying, Barb, about, I thought I was going to help, I thought I was supposed to be doing this. So it can create a lot of internal distress that, without attending to, can come out in sleep, can come out in personal relationships, can come out professionally in terms of decision making that may not be helpful for a case or for one's own reputation. And so it can be challenging. So I'm really seeing across the board a mix of anxiety, depression, and sometimes that more distress, anger, irritability.
Right.
Yeah.
And lawyers have, by and large, many of them are focused on tasks and helping others and not so aware of their internal processes. And
Right.
it seems reasonable to assume that that's exacerbated by going home and watching the news and experiencing how much everything is shifting
That's right.
on top of work.
That's right. And so sometimes, just even helping lawyers begin to be aware of what's happening inside because they are so focused on helping other people. We call it a U-turn, right? Like going inside and noticing what's actually happening for me. So, but we'll get to that after. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Um, Sean, what are your thoughts about what you've been seeing in LCL clients?
Yeah, just hearing Tracy's comments made me think of sort of a previous conversation I had recently around how a lot of the emotional experiences, whether that be anger, irritability, anxiety, um, at a certain level, those are really helpful for a lot of lawyers to like feel the courage to do something, you know, scary, right? To advocate for a client or the anxiety that helps them stay sharp and identify issues or not miss something. And what's challenging, particularly these days, is when that that useful feeling lingers, right? Instead of it being a tool that I could use in a certain situation, now it's like a prolonged experience. So instead of feeling anxious when I'm reviewing a memo, looking for mistakes or making sure that I have everything covered, and then I turn that off or turn it down when I'm done with that task. Now that feeling lingers because it's not just this task that is eliciting this anxiety or my focus. It's this prolonged or global sense of pressure or concern or strain. And so obviously what what at one point was helpful now is becoming a liability. And so that prolonged anxiety or irritability or anger now is not just serving me in a task or in a particular setting. Now it's harming me at home. It's harming my relationships with colleagues. It is making me unable to relax and turn things off. So I see a lot of that in terms of, in some contexts or to some degree, this would be helpful, but now it's sort of morphed into something unhelpful. And then I see a lot of different reactions to that. So for some, it's like disengagement. It's like, this is too much. I need to sort of check out or avoid um, or withdraw from being engaged. And so for some lawyers, it's a like a protective device to sort of in line with the idea of compassion fatigue. Is like it's so much energy to really care and connect with people. I'm just sort of gonna shut that off and just focus on, the task at hand. And in some ways that makes sense to be focused at the task at hand. But on the other hand, it's like it's a barrier between you and your client or you and your colleague. And so now I'm not able to connect the way that I used to because of this sort of ongoing pressure or demoralization. And oftentimes, with burnout and demoralization, um, one of the things at the heart of it, as you mentioned, Jeff, is it's like feeling a lack of control, right? So whether it's in the work environment, trying really hard and not feeling like your efforts are resulting in anything that you're trying to do, or you're not able to accomplish what you're trying to do. Um, and then demoralization is more of a global sense of like, it doesn't really matter. Like there's nothing I can do. I don't have control over these bigger issues in the world or in my community or what have you. And therefore I'm feeling weighed down because I don't have this control. And so for some, again, it's the reaction is withdrawal. Like I can't do anything about it. I'm going to withdraw. For others, it's I'm going to try to control, I'm trying to increase my efforts to control. And sometimes that can be helpful if that effort is, geared towards something that they literally have control over. So one of the things that is helpful, is around boundaries, right? Having some healthy control around your boundaries. And this is also an area where a lot of lawyers and law students struggle, which is, you know, sometimes the idea is, or the thought is that I need to try really hard towards controlling something that I can't control. And hence I'm leaving my boundaries behind with the effort or the thought that I can make some sort of difference by trying harder. And it's actually one of those sort of reinforcing cycles where the more effort I put into controlling something that I can't control, the worse it gets, or the worse I feel. And so I see that leading to things that sort of lawyers reconsidering their jobs or their positions or their organizations. Back in the day, we used to clinicians used to talk about the relocation cure, which is like when someone is suffering and they don't know what to do about it. One thought is like, I'm just going to move. I'm going to move somewhere else and things will be better. And so I think a lot of times we have that thought of, I just need to change something just so that this constant situation changes in some way. And so whether that's moving geographically or moving positions or organizations, that can be an appealing idea. The trick with the relocation cure is that if you don't have an awareness of what it is that is making your situation feel this way, then you're likely just taking that cause with you to wherever you go next. And so it's really important for people to sort of be thinking about, like, what is it about my situation that is at the heart of it, and what can I do about it, which we'll get into in a bit. The other thing I wanted to mention was also hear a lot about sort of generational differences around like what to do about these things, what to do about burnout, what to do about managing stress or the pressures of practicing law or studying law. And so I think there's definitely lots of differences, based on what your values are, what your experiences are. And I think it's really important for people of different perspectives or generations not to assume that one is the right way and therefore the other needs to adjust to you automatically, but in fact to be open, to be curious about why is that helpful for you versus why is this helpful for me. And I think there's lots of opportunity for us to learn from that perspective versus being too entrenched into the way that we're thinking about it. But there's lots of sort of things to pay attention to around how demoralization affects us. And back to Tracy's point, that the more aware that we are, even if we don't know what to do after we have that awareness that this is how it's affecting me, that's an essential starting point, is to be aware. And then from there, we can identify options. But without that awareness, it's really hard to make any changes. So I'll leave it there and I'll return to other thoughts later.
Okay. Yeah, and there's some aspects of Seligman's work, including that focused on lawyers, that came to my mind as you were speaking about being trained to pay attention to what's wrong, and then imagine when you come home and there's so much wrong all the time, and being how that leads to feeling more anxious and depressed. And also his work on learned helplessness, which may come up later as well. But I've been, my part of this observation segment relates to addictive behavior. Now, we know that lawyers have a very high rate of substance use disorder, primarily alcohol use disorder, in comparison to most other groups of Americans. So that's nothing new. And partly that's related to the ways that drinking has been embedded in the culture and is a big part of the culture in both law school and law firm life, and is a legal substance and has been sort of smiled upon as a means of not only being social, but coping. And every addictive substance has in common the fact that it works, it has an effect, and it has a quick effect. So it's very understandable that lawyers will turn most often to alcohol, certainly not all lawyers, as a way of getting a sense of relief, perhaps numbing themselves, in some cases feeling a sense of this is my reward for what I went through today. They might find it helpful in getting to sleep with everything that's on their mind, although it will tend to help people fall asleep but not stay asleep, because there tends to be a nervous system rebound in the middle of the night. And it's kind of an approved way of dealing with the overwhelming pressures and stresses of the job and also of life. And I think many of us noticed, not only with lawyers, that when COVID hit, and that was certainly a huge universal stress, a lot of us were doing Zooms with our friends and colleagues, etc. And I noticed at that time how many people were bringing alcohol into the room with them in the Zoom. It seemed to be something that more and more people were turning to. Although there are other encouraging statistics in terms of of alcohol use among the younger generations. But the problem, and so we're seeing that also. I'm seeing that also. I mean, I'm always talking to lawyers who are describing drinking that either has gotten to the point of concerning them, or where it's not hard to see that it's having an adverse effect on them, even though it's embedded in their daily lifestyle. Of course, the problem with it is that drinking or drugging as a response to these stresses, while understandable, is only temporary kind of relief. It doesn't do anything to solve ongoing problems. And then it tends to have an adverse effect on your functioning, whether or not you develop an addiction, in terms of your ability to think clearly, and affects your behavior and your health. We now know that alcohol shortens life and is not good for one's health overall. And then a substantial number of people, their nervous systems will adapt to it. They'll need increasing amounts of it, and they'll develop full-fledged addictions. And this is based partly on their unique nervous systems, and also affected by what they've been through in the past, and including past traumatic experiences. So that's part of what I've seen, is that it's not a long pathway for lawyers to go from social approved, law life oriented drinking to drinking that really starts to lead to deteriorating mental health and functioning. So that is another aspect of what we're observing. Now we're going to move toward the subject of what do we think would be good recommendations clinically for coping with all of what we've been discussing. And I'm just going to spend a few minutes to mention how does one deal with a situation of demoralization where it feels, and this is related to Seligman's learned helplessness, where it feels like I can't do much. Whatever I do, I'm still faced with very stressful, worrying circumstances over which I have little influence, and what am I doing? And so one aspect is trying to grab a hold of two things: the meaning of what one is doing and the fact that one still does have power over some things. We may feel like we're helpless and powerless in general, but there are still many aspects of what we're faced with in our lives that we have some power over. So in the practice of law, I think it's good to reconnect with not only how am I getting through each day, how am I handling this case and that case, but what got me interested in this? What is the meaning of it? What is my purpose? What are my goals? Am I making efforts and doing things that are consistent with that, and that feel like the correct thing for me to do in these situations? Um, and and although there's much that I'm powerless over, what are the things that I can do, and what kind of action can I take? So one kind of action might be um, joining with different kinds of communities that have goals. So that might include going to uh, a rally or joining with professional communities or faith communities, um, or finding ways to build bridges with people of differing viewpoints and counteract the divisions that we see so much of in our lives now. And then when it's safe to take a stand for what you believe in, what's consistent with your own moral values. And one example of that we saw was when law firms were placed in positions and universities were placed in positions of you either go along or there are going to be big consequences to you. And we saw some firms kind of capitulate, we saw other firms like WilmerHale, for example, that decided to take a stand, or we saw universities like Harvard that decided to take a stand. So there's some risk in that, but also a sense of empowerment and giving meaning to what you're doing, which I think counteracts the sense of demoralization. Those are my thoughts about that. Let's go now to Tracy for thoughts on the issues that you were bringing up before about emotional dysregulation.
Yeah, I'm really appreciating. I felt motivated as you were saying that, Jeff, thinking about activities that can get us out of that demoralization or low energy, that shutdown. And I think we probably all can think on a personal level of that. And that's kind of what motivated us to do this to begin with, by the way.
Right.
You know, when the four of us, we could often sit around and feel pretty demoralized, especially if Jeff is leading the conversation. um, but you know, and so one of the ways, like as a clinician, that helps us is like when we can feel like, oh, this is our mission to be able to help, and we're all in this together, that sense. So I did want to comment on that, that actually this is part of that way for us to navigate our own personal struggles with demoralization. So, as I was saying earlier about the recognizing our own personal emotional dysregulation, I often, you know, when I'm working with lawyers, I'll have them kind of look at early warning signs. Like, how do I know when I'm starting to get dysregulated? And it could be not as obvious as those big yelling moments, you know, or those really, you know, crying episodes. It can be just much more subtle than that. And for some of us, it's more physical, where it's the sleep, our appetite, we're drinking more or eating less, or whatever the kind of personal way that we're trying to do our best to regulate. So it's just being able to be aware. What are those signs that I might be struggling? And when I'm asking lawyers to do that, I'm also asking them to do that non-judgmentally and kindly, because we can quickly elicit a shame response in ourselves if we start judging what we're doing. And that often can lead to shutdown. Like shame kind of stops us from listening and not wanting to do a lot of introspection. So if we're going to start looking at maybe some of the challenges we're having, we want to do that with kindness, to recognize we are doing the best we can, that these coping skills were adaptive at one point and maybe they're not as adaptive now. So that's really the first thing, is like noticing the signs and doing that with compassion, recognizing we're probably doing the best we can. And then, this is where the nervous system regulation tools are so helpful. So if we notice our particular pattern is to shut down and get pretty low, our energy, then the techniques or strategies that are helpful are what builds energy. Like, so maybe it is going to a rally where you feel some of the energy of other people, or maybe it's a movement and exercise and joining a group where you're getting to do that together collectively, or you get to play pickleball and start to get out some of your aggression. So for some of us, it really may be physical stimulation and activity if we're feeling pretty low in our nervous system. And also it could be around some of the physical things like sleep, making sure that we're getting enough sleep and hydrating, etc. More often, or I would say equally often, when people are coming in activated, we really need to have tools both in the moment and, also, ongoing, to help with reactivity, right? Because getting in trouble often happens when we are limbically driven. The limbic system of our brain, the amygdala, the hippocampus, those are areas of the brain that put us in that danger zone, that part of our brain that's detecting a threat response, either in someone else or a situation. And when that's running the show, that's when we yell, that's when we get irritable, that's when we send off a fiery email or text that we say, uh-oh, after. Or it could even impact ethics, right? We may do something that actually could impact a case we're working on. So that's when it's really critical to have some really quick hacks or quick ways to get back into our zone of tolerance. And so what are those? I mean, they're not new, but they are really helpful. So the first thing is we want to find a way to communicate to our brain when we're starting to get activated. Our brain's getting hijacked. We need a way to get to that brain of ours before we go really, really off the rails. And so that starts usually with the breath, this bridge where when we slow our breath down, even usually takes about 3 to 5 breaths. When we're breathing calmly, that message is going back up into the brain, and our brain says, "Oh, okay, everything's okay. There's actually not danger right now." And so that quiets that amygdala, that threat detector, and that helps to recruit our thinking part of our brain, our prefrontal cortex. And we're able to actually take a moment to respond, or maybe not to respond. That's like my favorite trick, is just not to do anything in that moment, to give our brains a chance to catch up. So helping our breath and our body remain calm, even if we're not feeling calm at all, signals to the brain, hey, we're okay, we're not in immediate danger. So the breathing, the regulation of the body, right? So helping our bodies to find some kind of calmness. And then the other piece is to find connection, right? When we're struggling and we're alone, feeling that's actually this great opportunity to find connection. Connection is soothing to the nervous system. Finding someone to talk to when you've made a mistake, when you're struggling, it literally changes what's happening in the brain, and it turns on another part of our nervous system regulation, where we feel more at peace. Everyone's probably been watching Punch the Monkey, or I do. This is one of my, I don't know if it's a nervous system regulation, but Punch is that little monkey in Japan that got rejected by its mom and carries around that stuffed animal, right? And he is a classic you watch his little nervous system try to regulate. And when you see him hugging, he has a girlfriend now, I think, and he has a grandma. All right, I am watching this too much. I acknowledge this. But anyway, it's so classic for me because it's such an emotion regulation lesson. You get to really see, oh, he's regulating, and you watch him regulate, soothing and feeling calm in the presence of other. In the presence of other. So we need ways to do that. And so if you forget all about what I'm saying with the breathing and the body, we need to we need our little stuffed animal, and we need our person, and we need people and our colleagues, right? And that does regulate our nervous system. I could go on, but I'm gonna pitch it back to you, Jeff, to move forward.
Well, the next one we're going to turn to for tips on coping and resilience, etc., is Sean.
Thanks, Jeff. And Tracy, thank you for clarifying what punch the monkey is, because at first I thought, what do you recommend we do? It doesn't sound humane at all. Like, poor monkey. Yes, punch is the name of the monkey. I'm glad
Yeah.
that you clarified that. Um, yeah, so humor is a good coping mechanisms for sure. And just to build off of what Tracy was saying, that's probably one of the most common things that I recommend people sort of have at the front of their mind is this idea of don't go it alone, right? There's so many times when we feel, you know, under the weight or sort of we feel the pressure and our first go-to is to try to figure out how to do it all by ourselves. And we're oftentimes we sort of neglect our need for community and connection, and sometimes we don't appreciate how helpful that is. And so I just want to emphasize that point again. And there is a difference between being around people and being connected to people. So I think that's an important distinction. You can be in a crowd and still feel alone. And so being able to connect with people, talking with people about what is important to you, what you're going through, what you're feeling, what you're thinking, having somebody hear that and validate those concerns and experiences is super important. In addition to the connection piece, I also just think of activities that are helpful. And so, particularly going back to that idea of, burnout and demoralization often have this foundational element of lacking control. I'm seeing these things happening around me at work, in the world, in my community, and I don't feel like I have any control over them, or my efforts don't connect directly to making, change that I want to see. And so I feel powerless. So one sort of very practical thing that I find helpful is to literally do something that I have control over, that I can see the effects of. And so a common one is like literally doing the dishes. It's like, oh, there was chaos in the sink. I put effort into this, and now there is order and cleanliness in my kitchen. And there's something about not only having a clean kitchen, but seeing the fruit of my effort, seeing the results. Like there was some effort I invested, and now I see the effect of it. And I often talk to people about, hobbies. Do you have hobbies that you can pour time and energy into that are rewarding and fill you back up? And I often reference one of my things I like to do is like home improvement projects. And if you're like me, it's a great investment of your time and energy. It can also be frustrating as well as rewarding. And so one of the reasons why I find it so helpful is when you're successful at a home improvement project, you have a visual reminder. Like every time I walk by the banister that I fix, I'm like, oh yeah, I did that. Right. Whereas in a lot of the work that we do, when we do have successes, those successes often fade and they're replaced with what the next problem is. And so like what's in front of us is usually like the next problem, as opposed to a reminder of I have been successful, or my efforts have been fruitful. And so outside of work, when you have that in a hobby or home improvement projects, if you're weird like me, um, being that having that reminder like, oh yeah, that was a challenging problem. I figured it out. I put effort into it, and now I could see that there's something good there. Um, that is like a very important reminder that I do have some control. It might not be what I'm hoping for in terms of the broader world and my broader situation, but it's a really helpful sort of injection of empowerment or hope. It's like I can remind myself on a small scale, on a regular basis, that I do have some control. My efforts do lead to something fruitful. Again, with home improvement projects, it's usually frustration before the encouragement. At least that's my experience, because I'm not a master of anything. But I find that really helpful. Then sort of tied into that, or one element of that is sort of like giving yourself permission to be flexible, to be imperfect, to try things that you think are interesting, and that applies to your career too. I think that giving yourself permission to think of your work or your position at your organization or your firm or your career in general, giving yourself permission to be flexible and think about like what sort of changes could I make that might be helpful, or you know, would I find some other activity or focus more rewarding? Am I feeling burnt out in this area of my activities, and would I benefit from something different? Not just that relocation cure idea of like just anything different would be better, but really being thoughtful about, what the reward or the encouragement would be about doing something different, right? If I'm not seeing, the changes in the world that I would like to, is there a way that I could see that in the day-to-day work that I'm doing? And that could be down to, the individual interactions I have with my colleagues, right? Like if I want to see more compassion in the world, like what can I do to extend compassion to Jeff? Um, or,
I
or,
need
or Tracy or Barb, but, Jeff really needs to know. So sometimes on a surface level, it can feel insignificant to focus your attentions on that, but I find it very helpful in terms of that in my face reminder, like, oh, this is how it works, right? This is how compassion is extended in the world, is by these small interactions. So I'll stop my talking there, and I'll let somebody else talk.
Yeah. I'm reminded of what comes up in some of the groups I run, where people can either become so compassionate that it wears them out, or they can protect themselves so much that they're no longer that connected with their clients, and that there's a sweet spot in between. That's true in our profession as well.
Yeah.
Well, let's see what Barb has on her mind
So
about
let me
recommendations.
just jump on that, what you just said about the sweet spot, because I think it's important for people, I think, to think about that it's unattainable to maintain the sweet spot. And I think what you just described, right, about either having periods or a sense of being numb, and then sometimes being sort of over engaged. I think we all go through that. I think that's not just a lawyer or a law student thing. I think it's true in our profession too. And I think that what we've sort of covered today, because I realize I'm sort of batting cleanup here at the end, is the importance of which is not taught in law school, and I think I wish was a stronger point of focus in the profession, about really teaching students and lawyers how to be more self-aware. Because I've seen this pattern over and over again, where lawyers are problem solvers, which is good because I want my lawyer to be a problem solver. But the issue, I think, is that oftentimes the focus is very outward, and it's all about what can I do to help this person? What can I do to solve this problem? How can I manage this situation? And I think lots of times the focus is so outward, or lawyers really learn how to compartmentalize in ways that in the long run are not helpful for them. So I think that if lawyers are very good, zealous advocates for others, but oftentimes not so much for themselves. And I would really like, and there was a number of things mentioned today about the ability to pause, the ability to sort of think something through, and the ability to recognize the value and the importance of knowing when and how to ask for help, which I think is oftentimes an Achilles heel for a lot of folks in the legal profession. So the importance of making professional connections, I think, cannot be understated, right? Whether it's bar associations, whether it's certain affinity groups that you're involved with, and seriously, to be able to have people in your life in the legal community, whether it's in school or in the profession in general, who you consider to be honest brokers, people who you could go to and that they're going to tell you the truth, whatever it is you have going on. I think that willingness to be available and vulnerable and be able to have an intimate connection with somebody who you can trust and rely on is hugely important. And whether you can find that in school, at a bar association, with an affinity group, in an internship, wherever you can find it, with a therapist you might work with, it's really important to have those people that you can go to and say, get a load of this. Am I out of my mind thinking about this? Does this make sense to you? When you've really tried to problem solve on your own and you've run up against your own resistance or your inability to manage options, it's really important to be able to have people you can go to for counsel, for perspective, for kind of another idea. Which brings me to the idea of the value of mentorship. I speak to students about this all the time, the importance of being able to have people who maybe are more senior in your area of practice, people that you know, and you've observed and you've seen them work, and by reputation you could rely on them and trust them for good counsel and insight, is really, really important. And to be able to create those kinds of connections really does matter. Lots of times, it's who people know that can make a huge difference in their lives and outcomes and resources and opportunities that they have, right? So, which brings us to that LCL is an invaluable resource. If you think about this, this is a program that people can utilize while they're in law school, while they're in their professional lives, and into their retirement. So it's a valuable service where the legal community are our people. And that's who that's who we work with, that's who we try to provide assistance to. So you should think about using us in any way, shape, or form that makes sense for you. If you find yourself in a particular situation where your best efforts are not enough, and that's all I could say. They're just not enough. They're good, but they might not be enough. So you should always think about us, whether you reach us via phone, email. We can set up Zoom meetings. We have a lot of available portals in terms of being able to connect. So utilize it. Thanks.
Right. And we have various groups and can create other groups that allow lawyers to communicate with and bond with one another in the kinds of pressures that they are experiencing. I don't think I see, I think I see comments. I don't see questions, which is good because we don't have too much time left. But I think one thing that I wanted to throw in, as we were talking, I realized that when we began planning this, I had another idea that I never fully pursued, which was to look at ways that various populations have been through demoralizing crises in the past and have always come through it. We've seen it in recent years with some environmental disasters, some big fires that the communities have endured, losing homes and so forth. We saw it in all of us with COVID. That was a big crisis. And we all adapted to that pretty readily and figured out ways to get around it and to still stay connected to one another. And so I know that I myself often feel like, oh, what kind of world are the next generations coming into here? But we do see that humans find a way, and what we've been talking about today is the importance in response to demoralization, which is a systemic response and not a personal issue so much, that finding ways to experience where one still has some power and impact, finding means of emotional regulation, and finding ways of connecting with one another. These are important things. Now I think a
Yeah.
question or two may have come in.
Yeah, and I can read it, Jeff, if you want to.
Great.
Any particular insights or thoughts on this topic specific to solo practitioners, especially bar advocate trial attorneys like myself?
Well, I don't know if I have a specific answer except to note that I also run 2 groups for solo practitioners at LCL. And if people want to avail themselves of that, and the main rationale for those groups, which have been going on for years, is that solos have even more obstacles in finding means of connection because they're out there on their own. And both in terms of coping with stress and of knowing when they're making mistakes and then dealing with mistakes once they make them, which everyone does make mistakes. So I think the people in these groups find it quite useful to have a means of connecting and sharing with one another, both in terms of problem solving and feeling understood and lending compassion to each other and themselves.
I'll just throw in a little bit. In addition to Jeff's solo group and also being able to talk to the clinicians here one-on-one, I think particularly for solo practitioners, particularly bar advocates, a very common thing is just feeling overwhelmed with the work. There's so much work. It often feels like I don't have the time to do these things that are helpful, things that would be, restorative and life-giving. I've got too much work to do because I have to do everything myself. And so a big part of that, a big struggle is like having some boundaries in your schedule where you protect time so that you can do these other things. And so it's easier said than done for sure, but I think that's a really important starting place, whether you are blocking off time to make connections with, people in a group or a bar association, or, blocking off time to take time off. It's a big thing for solo practitioners. Like I can't take a vacation. I can't take time off. My work doesn't end. And so being able to feel like you have some control over, where the boundaries are for your work time and then where you have time to do other things is super important. Again, easier said than done. We're happy to talk with you about ways of doing that, but just keep that in mind.
Can I just jump in on this? Because I have to actually get off it too. I think one of the particular struggles too for solos is the financial constraints and the need sometimes to say yes to cases and situations and duty days, because they need to balance the equity right between the work and money. And I think sometimes the system can be onerous in a way that's different from folks that are not in that situation at CPCS or bar advocates. And this struggle, I think it's a significant tension between doing the work. They generally feel really pretty passionate about the work and trying to make an income and survive on it at the same time. So I need to get off, but I appreciate the time and effort, and it was nice to have everybody on here today, and hopefully people benefited from the info.
Right. And if people have more specific questions to themselves, they're invited to reach out to LCL. Thanks everybody for your participation.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.